welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore-Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
And me, Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
Our featured guest today is Berman Ghan. Berman Ghan is a writer and editor from Toronto whose prose and poetry have been published in Clarkesworld magazine, Strange Horizons, the Blasted Tree Publishing Company, the tÄmz Review, and others. His previous works include the short story collection, What We See in the Smoke. He now lives and writes in Calgary, Alberta, where he is a Ph.D. student in English literature at the University of Calgary. His new book is The Years Shall Run Like Rabbits, published by Buckrider Books. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you've published in magazines such as Clarkesworld, and this novel debut is science fiction. What drew you to this genre, and why do you think it's important for serious readers to pay attention to it?
I think genre was always inevitable for me. I think, my earliest works were in genre. A lot of my, passions as a kid were in genre. But I do think, and I think now especially, we're in a wonderful moment for science fiction and for speculative fiction in terms of who's allowed to write it and who's allowed to read it and what it's allowed to be about. And I look to other Canadian authors who dabbled in genre, and I look to writers generally. You mentioned those magazines, and a big source of inspiration for me is, as well as reading, like historically in the classics throughout the 20th century, but reading the people working now and the people working around me and above me and within the field of writing now, and seeing those inspirations. And I think, when I say I'm a science fiction writer, sometimes a friend will go, well, he's a speculative fiction writer, and which I think is a term Margaret Atwood made up to win awards. But it is, there is something to that. And in terms of, if you ask me how a spaceship goes in a story I've written with a spaceship, I'm going to go, oh, I don't know. That's not important. But I do think that, I'm a writer. I work with a love of imagery, I think, and the love of poetics within my writing. I was speaking to someone just the other day. I'm sitting in Calgary, Alberta, only a couple kilometers from where Sheila Watson wrote Double Hook. So I'm sort of enmeshed in a great tradition of experimentation as well. And I think speculative fiction and science fiction gives an opportunity to especially in the kind of work I want to do, to remove any kind of barrier or subtext from the wildness of what someone wants to say. I can be as extreme and as poetic and as almost surrealist as I want to be, to say the things that I want to say. I don't have to have, I can have a character who feels like the world is ending because the relationship ended, so the world around her can literally end. I can have someone look in the mirror and realize that their identity is not what they thought it was, or they can come out, or they can have some sort of incorporation that changes who they are, and so their body can become a jungle. I think it gives wonderful room to play. And I don't think that people should be limited by genre very much. I'm a science fiction writer. I'm also a Ph.D. out here at the University of Calgary in English, and people go, oh, so he must only read science fiction. And that's not true at all. I don't really see these boundaries. And increasingly, in my life and in my reading, sometimes I sort of just go, well, those are marketing terms. I'm not really thinking about it so much when I'm writing. I'm just here. And I think that's for everyone. And I think I'm sure when a fan of science fiction or speculative fiction picks up my work, I'm sure there's things that they'll see and they'll go, oh, haha, that's for me, that someone who, isn't from that sort of culture tradition would miss. But I don't really think that that's important at all. And I think there's sort of a panic to understand and to grasp in writing. And I'm happy for people to just feel it. And, I've gotten a few responses so far of someone going, I think I know what's going on. And I've just sort of been really happy to say, well, if you think you know what's going on, then if you think you know what's happening, then you know what's happening. And, that's been a real joy for me.
So, what kind of research did you draw from to create the world of the book and its rules?
Yeah, so it's funny, when I was writing it, I was very much thinking, oh, there's no rules in this. There's no consistency. I'm just saying whatever I want. In the edit, I very much learned that that was not true. I started from a place of, I read a lot of other literary, works, especially this book sort of began in the background of my master's thesis. But I also did read, I didn't read a single text like science textbook or anything like that. But I did read quite a lot of philosophy, which is, there's a lot of sort of, I would say, intersectionalisms and animal studies and queer ecology and post-humanism sort of injected into this book. And these are terms that I expect a lot of people who pick up the book will go, I don't know what that is. And that's okay. That's not really important to the reading. But in particular, I was struck by, there's a text by a thinker named Donna Haraway called The Cyborg Manifesto, which is a little bit older now, which sort of talks about that, the freeing potential of being mixed and fusions, and how that can release, some people who've been told that they are impure or that they are living improperly. I looked to a thinker named Timothy Morton in their book, a book called Hyperobjects, which was all about the strangeness of time. And they had a passage somewhere talking about the strangeness of how we see nature as this immovable, natural thing, when it's not and never can be. And I read, I injected a lot of, queer theorists and thinkers and poets as well into this work. So it was more, I read very little on how to make a hologram or a laser, but I did sort of keep myself in this, I guess in some ways very academic realm in the background, and it was interesting because I also grew up. One of the things that struck me about this idea of the cyborg as an empowered figure for both within disability and within queerness is that I grew up with immense hearing loss in my right ear is essentially not there at all. So I've lived my whole life with a hearing aid, and I have so reading passages of things saying like, well, that's not an object outside your body. That is another thing that mediates being you. And I wrote this little presentation once that I gave about the idea that I'm a plug-in cyborg, that, it's simply not screwed in, but that's okay. But then, it sort of led me to all these arenas of, well, in what other way are we mediated by these technologies, and what does that mean to us? I'm speaking to you through headphones popped onto my head, onto a computer that I'm running off of my phone's Wi-Fi. This book is a collection of my thoughts that entered the world because I typed them onto a keyboard and then sent them to a really thankfully interested party. We are all and constantly mediated by technology and by artifacts and artifice that changes the way that we get to think and that we get to express ourselves. And that was a big part of my approach to this book.
You have a character that pretty much does all of that. Nora Traveler is a genius scientist who invents all the AI and other technology that ultimately wreaks havoc in the world that you built. Nora believes in a dream she had about her tech ending the world. but she creates it anyway, almost as if it's a mission or propulsion, maybe. What do you think drives this character?
My partner, who's reading read bits of this book as it was written and had to listen to me talk about it for too many years, is reading the like finished and typed project, and said to me yesterday, "You made Nora really horrible." And yeah, she's sort of the Dr. Frankenstein running throughout this book. Um, and I sort of wanted someone who, as enmeshed as we are in change and in an increasingly intersectional world, or at least it should be. I think we also are in an age of seeing how fearful people can be. And I think Nora represents for me such a horrible fear of the future and of change and of people not looking or sounding like her in the future. And she wants to do everything she can to prevent that, but it's not something that can be stopped or changed. You can't make your she can't create a future where her son is straight. She can't create a future where the cities that she grew up in and the world that she sort of came to know would stay the way it was. But she's also running away from a future that can't happen in this book because she's been shown it. And I won't, I guess I shouldn't spoil that, but I guess part of this book too, and I guess an area I haven't talked about is bleeding in from my last book as well, is part of this book too is also about thinking about how, as wonderful as technology can be and as wonderful as these things that we've made can be, how horrible it is if we make it without and let it run without empathy, or care, and how horrible it can be to live in a world without any kind of politics of care or joy. And Nora is very much terrified of a future where, instead of, I don't know, doing the dishes or helping administer medicine, all of our tech instead writes our poems and kills our dogs.
Well, speaking of care, there is a love story at the heart of the book between two young women in Toronto. Morgan is the inventor of a virtual reality game about a perfect Toronto, and Daisy is a young political activist. Throughout the book, they both get drawn into different aspects of AI existence, and as their relationship continues, they evolve with their physical forms and states of being. The two things kind of evolve together. What does Morgan and Daisy's relationship represent for you? And how does that relationship comment on what it means to be human or alive? That's something you just touched on.
Yeah, for me, even though it doesn't come so clearly into focus until the later half of the book, for me, the love story between Morgan and Daisy is very much the center of this story, underneath all of the monsters and ghosts and big floating whales. That was sort of what I came to, and I sort of wanted something where they start their story together, but in that beginning where they are together, there's still this distance between them, but also it's about the distance is about the world that they live in. And I wanted to express something about queerness and what it means to see and communicate with another person as you change and as they change. And I think, while I think that can be connected with any kind of relationship, I think there is something very, very close to queerness and loving and changing at the same time. And that's sort of what I want. And even wherever they end up or however that happens, this book very much is about both a queer love story, and also in some ways about how sometimes being some kind of hybrid or monster might make that easier to reach, or easier to say the things that you wanted to say, especially through writing and through the kinds of gestures that we struggle with. And so a lot of this book is about a world that we enter this book in a world that isn't interested or happy with a love that is like what Daisy and Morgan have or want to have, and through 1,000 years and all of the all the wacky stuff, it is sort of about making a world that wants it.
One of the most charming characters in the book is Maid, a small, simple robot that Morgan cobbles together during her time on a space station that brings himself to life and falls in love with Morgan and eventually saves her. What brought Maid to life, and what is it about Maid that makes him seem so human?
I'm so happy that people like Maid. Well, I finished the previous section of the book, and I thought, and in those first sort of 80 or 90 pages, and I sort of nodded to myself, and I was like, okay, what have I done? Well, I've done I've written a genocide. I've written a ton of body horror. I've written a woman who's so that in that section of the book, I've written a version of Daisy who is so utterly lost to herself. I've written a suicide, and I kind of just was like, I need a cute little guy. And there's a lot of, I think, like AI and creation in this book is horrible and sort of having to free itself. And what struck me, and what I hope would strike the reader, I guess I'm giving the game away a little bit, is throughout this book there's a lot of horrible artificial intelligence and emergent intelligence that has to be fought because it was designed under capitalism, and it was designed under this mode of production that demands a certain way of being. And then out in space, Morgan makes Maid for no reason other than that she wants a friend and that she wants to share her experiences with someone. So we have this like horrible satanic box buried in the ground in Toronto demanding that borders be strictly enforced. And then up in space, we got a little guy. And I really loved writing Maid. I'm totally fine copying to after I wrote it that I went into the next room at the time. My roommate at the time, I was like, "What you watching?" They were like, "Wally." And I was like, "Oh yeah." But I sort of returning to science fiction fan people who read science fiction will see something is I love a cute little robot. And also, I thought Maid was an interesting chance to sort of write. I've talked a lot about things changing very slowly. I thought Maid was a fun opportunity to write someone who would mature from that like really youthful place of innocence and grow and change and to make themselves so quickly. Maid's body only changes because Maid decides I should have arms and legs. So he builds some, and Maid decides I should have other things, and I should have other ways of caring, and so he builds them. And so that was kind of a delight to play with. It's one of the first things I wrote for this book. And for me at least, Morgan and Maid are in love, but I think that's also a different kind of love than the one that Daisy and Morgan share. And I think, in a book so full of I don't know if I'm selling this well. In a book so full of pain, I wanted some other kinds of care. And I think Maid represents that. And I have his voice so sharply and perfectly in my head as a funny little beep, and his, even his speech impediment early on, throughout the book, Maid only speaks. And I think that's sort of a trope with AI characters and robots in movies and film and TV that I don't see expressed a lot written, so I wanted to put that in. But I also wanted, why would you give a robot a speech impediment? I think we've learned now that when we have a computer speak to us, it's not that it stutters, it's just that it says gibberish. And so I sort of wanted even that. So I'm like, what does that mean about Maid trying to feel real and feel, how does he work to feel like alive and also to feel himself past sort of, I guess, dehumanizing would be the wrong word, but past like constraints of just being a cute little guy and what autonomy means to him.
Well, alternatively, the most maniacal character in the book is Mother, an AI that uses Morgan's VR game to override its prime directive about harming humans. How did you come to that idea? And do you think that AI might develop the capability to direct itself in that way? Say no.
Um, well, we don't have any AI in the world. We have chatbots are just speech to text, and uh, there's a passage in this book where I think well, I'm going to get this wrong. It's either I think it's called strong AI or heavy AI. I know there's one is a real term, and one is one where else like I'm going to change it and make it up just a little. Um, so the mother AI, who is also sort of called like the city AI throughout, is that first machine that that Nora brings to life. And it's funny because she has to use virtual reality to sort of, it has to retrain itself to be able to harm people and to be able to murder. But in no ways is it not following its are they not following their directive? Like the mother AI of the city was told, keep people pure and keep the rule of law and keep Canadians looking like Canadians. And so, while it's never said so expressly, it's an AI that's very much unintentionally, because it wasn't what Nora hoped, but it was what Nora put into it. It is an AI with colonial intent and with like white supremacist rhetoric and with like like horrible, I think horribly gendered ideologies living in it. So it sort of had no choice to be what it ends up being. It is, like if you make a thing and you say, hey, this is the world, and then it goes, oh, okay, what is the world? What's right and wrong? And you say, well, there's only two genders, and people who enter a country without a visa should be shot. It's gonna go, okay, and it's gonna do its best with that. So, the mother AI does, in a way, it is sort of the biggest, the only real villain of the novel, but it's more of a mechanism than a villain. It's just doing what it was taught to do. It was taught to separate what's inside from what's outside, and it's doing its best with that to simply emulate all of the horrible things that we do to our people and to each other. And it builds a cool robot body at one point because I'm being all high-minded and uppity and whatever, but also I at one point I was like, and it's shiny. I should acknowledge that.
Yes, there is a lot of fun in the book too. Yes, we should say that. Yeah, there are some big things, but there's also a lot of fun. And you touched on your interest in philosophy, and one of the big ideas that repeats in the book is that all life is a machine. Can you tell us a little bit more about your thinking on this idea and what role it plays in the book?
Totally. Well, it's not really, it's not an idea. It's not really an idea that I've thought of, and I'm not going to cite anybody because we're not in a conference. I don't want to bore any listeners, but I think it's more about an expression of trying to rethink what life is and what being human is, and sort of uncoupling. Sometimes when we think about being human as something like innate and special, without really realizing it, part of what we are doing is first we are defining what does it mean to be human. I am going to cite someone, I guess. So there's a theorist named Rosie Berdotti who very much points to how in the Renaissance, we drew the Vitruvian man, that he's the guy, he's got his arms and legs out, and it was labeled and was like, all right, this is what being human looks like. This is what a voting citizen, proper in his mind human looks like. But when you look at that, if you say, well, if that's being human, if being human is a 6 foot tall, skinny white guy with with proper Christian, nice beard, well, what is everybody else? And what is everything else? If that's the only thing we've allowed to be human, what does everything else get to be? And so, a lot of talking through like life as a machine, life as a mechanism is sort of breaking down that first, there's nothing innate to human life that's a miracle or that's special, that's not innate to all life. And there's nothing innate to being able to, like think that is a divine gift. I think that also, I think about disability. Like I said, I think about disability a lot, and there's nothing to, and there's nothing, and there's if we allow like these ideas of gender and of race to define being human, we're putting so much, coming back to Mother, we're putting so much on the outside. And that well, a lot of this novel is about when I talked about science fiction is about allowing your images to lead. And a lot of this novel was in as wild as a way as possible of just giving at least one instance of that hierarchy breaking down. And it's also, it's sort of this idea for me that, there's ghosts running around in this novel. There's all different sorts of people and in different shapes and sizes, but there's no soul in any of them. Everybody simply comes to be, and you can come to be differently, and you can come to be from both internal and external. Trying to think of a prettier word than noise, but I guess there is no prettier word than noise. And that was sort of a big part of this, of sort of returning to that idea of the cyborg as someone who is mediated by such technologies, is no less human than someone who is not. And so, because of this realm in this arena, who is being mediated and who gets to speak and think becomes far more like in flux, I suppose.
Arthur Traveller, Nora's son, is a recurring character in the book. In some ways, he's kind of like a Messiah-like character, one who is sacrificed and then becomes a beacon. Was that your intent? And do you think we need Messiah characters or images in times of great change?
Well, I wanted to play with that a little bit. I very much sort of gave him both a bit of a Moses-like figure of, a man who wants to bring people to a promised land. I gave a little Jesus wink. He died at 33. But sort of the point of Arthur was like, when you look at the synopsis for this book and you stare at it, I think there's a very simple version of this book where it's like, oh, well, Arthur is the main character. He's the obvious chosen one boy, like who has this wonderful destiny. And he doesn't do it at all. He, gets things started. He does a really bad job of it, and then he dies. And the version of him that comes back just sort of watches and goes, oh. So in a lot of ways, I think Arthur was about refusing that idea of a Messiah, or that there are very special people in history around which the world moves. And instead, there's nothing inherently special or mystical about Daisy, who very much is one of the people who takes his place. She was just there, and she just so happened to be able to, in more ways than one, deprogram herself enough to understand what was wrong with the systems of justice and being that she was living with and helping. So yeah, like Arthur is supposed to be Arthur is a Messiah cut off at the knees. And the world seems to get along fine, and things unfold without him, and they certainly don't unfold in the way that he would have intended. We talked about Nora and this terrible destiny that she gave to him that he just doesn't get keep or get to do or even choose for himself. And so yeah, there's a lot of this book. This book goes very far through time. Because of the nature of my writing, it does focus on few characters and their very personal journeys. And in some ways, the destiny of the world is just sort of just an incidental backdrop to two girls who'd really like to make out on the moon. And so, Arthur is I also kind of enjoyed that Arthur is in a lot of ways, like when I say he is like the classic chosen one figure, Arthur, yeah, like Arthur is this white boy from nowhere with, like a mysterious parentage and a terrible destiny, and it's up to him what the future gets to look like, and all that sort of just falls away. But I did want to keep him around because I felt I wanted him to. By the end of the novel, I think the version of Arthur that we see, even though he doesn't get to speak very much, just sort of a friend and just sort of a specter watching a better history than he could have had. So yeah, so I gave him the imagery of Moses in the background of Jesus, and the name of the King of the Britons, but mostly as a prank, because he doesn't get to be that sort of figure.
Well, elsewhere, death is not the end is also a recurring theme throughout the book. And I don't want to have any spoilers, but Daisy wants to reinstate death to end the centuries-long cycle of resurrections. Without giving away those spoilers, can you explain why it's important for her to do that? What does it mean to the story? If this is spoilery, let us know and we'll
That's okay.
cut it out.
I don't believe in spoilers. It's funny. I both don't believe in spoilers. This is something my dad will yell at me about. I'll be like, "Oh, I saw that episode of TV before you. I'm going to tell you how it ends immediately." But because I like to talk about I think I'm slowly becoming a teacher now, and one of the things that's so funny is that I'll do a class with students, and I'll be like, I want to tell them how it ends, because that's not why we're here. But I want to talk about it, but I won't do that. I'll try. I think there's a bunch of apocalypses in this novel. More than one, like an environment ends and the world ends, and sort of hidden in the background, a whole universe ends at one point. But apocalypses can be very personal and small too, and not necessarily about just the end period, but about a radical moment of change for a way of being or a way of seeing the world. And Daisy goes through a ton of them. I actually lost count of how many times and in how many ways Daisy dies in this novel, but Daisy can't stop dying. And the novel, for me, doesn't really end with death reinstated so much as the novel ends with characters losing control over that sort of, I guess, like linked system of apocalypse and death. And the end of Daisy's story is not about killing the world or saving the world, but just about sort of letting it go and just letting it be, and accepting and letting its people be, and letting its people be whatever they want, is sort of the end of Daisy's story. So whether or not death is back in the world at the end of this novel is sort of unclear to me. If I was a hack, I could write a sequel. I'm saying that here and now so that I never will. But there, see, and I have too much shame and guilt, because now I know that I've said that and it'll be in the world, so I won't do it. I've saved myself. But yeah, like I don't know if death is back in the novel properly at the end of this. But it's no longer anybody's job. There's no longer any sort of rules on how to run it or how to live. And that's sort of Daisy's end. Is throughout the novel, I think increasingly as Daisy finds a purpose in life, her story is one of clenching a fist tighter and tighter, because she's like, well, if I let go of something, all these people will be harmed, and all these places that I care for will be harmed. And eventually at the end, it's just sort of, it's okay, because this world that she and these people that she's cared for have changed so much, and she simply has to let go to allow them to keep changing and loving.
Well, we're happy to help save you from yourself. No worries.
Thank you.
Okay. What are you working on now? Are you writing anything else in this vein?
Yeah, I'm doing a couple things right now. I'm thrilled to say that I have another book coming out with Buckrider in 2026. Um, ink fresh on the pages, so this is a cool exclusive. Um, a collection of short stories that tentatively titled "The Library Cosmic," um, and it was a delight to write. I was my very much my COVID book, because that was, I wrote almost the whole thing in 2022 ish, um, and it's I haven't let go of some of these themes, at least. Um, so I have more time travel and more monsters and more cyborgs and more kisses in that as well. And then so that's set aside for sometime in 2026. And then I'm here at the University of Calgary as both a PhD in English and creative writing. I'm working with some really wonderful people, and I am here to write a novel. That will be my sort of end product, and I've begun it. And as opposed to having new ideas or being at all a creature of depth or complexity, um, I'm simply barreling straight ahead. And I think, part of the joy for that is I very much figured out these ideas as I wrote The Years Shall Run Like Rabbits. And I know, and I have so much more to say about it. So my next novel, this novel sort of, as it ends, you can sort of see me becoming impatient with the cyborg, and you can kind of see me being like, oh, no more machines. I want to do some monsters. And so that will be my next novel, is finding um, even wilder ways for characters to speak and to connect with each other. And that's what I've begun, and I can't give a title to it, and I can't give a description of it, except for if anyone wants a teeny tiny little hint. My second story in Clarkesworld magazine, which was called Phosphorescence, is about two young women who launch a colossal island-sized jellyfish into space, and the next book will start there. So um, yeah, like, it's been sort of a joy, and the Years Shall Run Like Rabbits has really freed me too, to sort of accept that maybe my writing isn't the most. I hope people enjoy it, but to sort of free myself from worrying about audience and from worrying about the nature of my ideas and the way I want to write, and just be like, let's be crazy, let's go as wild as we can, and that's where I'm headed.
Well, that sounds amazing. So back to The Years Shall Run Like Rabbits. Would you like to read from some of your work for our audience?
So I will give. It's really hard to. It's really hard to just jump into any section of this book. Everything is so context dependent. But I will say, for this scene, we meet Daisy as a cyborg on the moon, and there's a man who's sleeping and he can't wake up because there's machines in his body that won't let him. Daisy takes off her fractured glasses, letting them rest on the chest of the sleeping man, where they rise and fall with the impossible slowness of breath. She allows the blue of her eyes to pierce the room as her forefingers find Miles's temples. This man is in chains, the cyborg says, as her fingers become drills to penetrate flesh. Miles's milky eyes fly open, blind and full of horror, and he screams as blood finds new homes in the white fabric of pillowcases and bed sheets to which Daisy has released. All bodies are civilizations, are institutions, are armies, are organizations of cells upon cells. All bodies are unconscious agreements of those many organizations to hold the image of that single farm until all those organizations of cells finally break down and that image goes to dust. All bodies are this way, but none more so than the cyborg. The cyborg cells have signed many agreements throughout its lifetime, while all other bodies sign but one. Daisy's cells have made their agreements to be her body. They have made their agreements with other organizations of her body. They have made agreements with implants and augmentations, with software and hardware and nanite. Deals have been struck in the microscopic, not only to serve as the body of Daisy, but to serve the organizations that have co-opted that body, to become the tool she is now. Now imagine the nanites that are Daisy, spreading, twirling, unfolding, drilling into the soft tissue of the brain of Miles Traveler, and within that flesh, the organizations of Daisy find factions in conflict. There are the institutions that have always been there, the many interlinked cells that are Miles. Then there are two others, two different organizations of cells, two invasive species, holding tight, eating, refusing to make deals with the civilizations that are Miles. The first army she recognizes. It is easy to see them. They are cousins of the predecessors of her own terrible machine. Less capable, less durable, less intelligent. They are easy to spot. They carry the signature of their manufacturers. Daisy swats them like fireflies. Imagine the nanites of Daisy fighting these older, slower nanites like a war between fireworks in a dark sky. The ground beneath them is Miles. Daisy's bright fires gobble up those dimmer, less efficient explosions before they can descend to scorch the soil beneath. Then you must imagine the dark sky above to be that third civilization, something other than man and machine that Daisy recognizes as an invader of her own body as well. She can't purge the sky. She doesn't know how. To wake Miles, Daisy only needs to gobble up the old machines that imprison him. For the cyborg, this is the easiest of tasks. She burns agreements hiding in his brain, leaving scars of smoke trails between the sky and the earth until she is the only machine that can be found. Daisy's organizations retreat back through her fingertips into the form of herself and watch as, in the sudden absence of that mechanical army, the organizations of Miles look up at that unknowable organization of the sky. Daisy lets him go, and they meet in agreement.
Ben Berman Ghan, thank you very much for joining us. His new book is The Years Shall Run Like Rabbits, published by Buckrider Press.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.